Thank you, Cynthia. Welcome, everybody. So this is the last presentation before the quiz. Few words about the quiz. Be prepared to participate in our brilliant code quiz animated by the fabulous Gérard de Vivier. Really, check him out. He's great. To play, you need two things. You need to connect to the dedicated live stream on WebEx. You will find the link in the program. And you also need the Kahoot app or go on the Kahoot website. And the rest will be given by Gérard in the live stream. Next, please. So, DDoS. Cynthia said it already. I mean, DDoS is not a nice topic, but it's a reality. DDoS attacks are happening. So I do suppose that you know what DDoS is. Let me just briefly remind the most important characteristics. A denial of service is an attack that stops you from either providing services or consuming services. And if that is not a problem for you, then a DOS attack is not your problem, at least not in the short time. But I bet that today your company will consume services online or will provide services that are critical. So probably you should worry for here. Now, a distributed DDoS attack adds two important elements to a DOS attack. It's that it's a distributed attack, so it comes from many, many different source IPs. This means you can forget filtering on source IP. There are just too many. And the other element is the attacker has more bandwidth. Whatever you have as a bandwidth, the attacker has more or will come back with more. Also, do care about collateral damage. If, for instance, your ISP or a customer of your ISP gets attacked, you may be a victim, and not because you're under attack, but because somebody else is attacked and you are collateral damage. So mostly you are powerless because you're sitting on the wrong end of the stick, but still there are things you can do. So let's look at the current DDoS attack landscape. What's happening? As with a lot of cybercrime these days, it's mostly about money. For example, since this summer, there is an ongoing DDoS for ransom campaign. The attackers pose as state-sponsored APTs. If you're in security, you know the terms Fancy Bear and Lazarus Group. But analysts agree that these people are not behind the attacks. It's just some people that claim to be some really powerful people so that you have fear them. So where is the money in the DDoS landscape? Well, it's really a value chain. Maybe you get attacked for ransom when somebody collects your money. And then what they do with the money? Well, they keep it, but they also pay the service, the DDoS service that they buy, because the attacker may buy the service from a booter. The booter himself will probably buy a botnet, so he has to pay for that. And then the botnet operator, he will have to enroll more bots. How does he do that? Well, he buys more vulnerabilities. So there's really different levels of services against money, against value that are in this value chain. And that's what keeps it running. And I tell you, this value chain is really oiled. It's running really, really well. And that means that running DDoS attacks is really easy. It's child's play. It's as easy as cooking a recipe. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to today's DDoS cooking lesson. To mount your DDoS attack, we will need one internet-connected computer, at least one botnet, an unsuspecting protocol. I personally prefer UDP because it gives the best consistency. And then, no DDoS can be perfect without a good solid amplification protocol. Many are available in your local network, but my favorite is DNS because it blends so well with the other traffic on the network. If you have them available in your fridge, an unsecured application to exploit is a perfect topping. I tell you a secret, Memcached is my favorite. To make it easy for beginner chefs, all ingredients can be bought ready mixed. Look for boot or stressor services, starting as low as $20 a month. So you get really the idea. DDoS attacks, that's nothing fancy or nothing that needs technical skill. Anybody can go online and buy a DDoS attack. You don't even have to go on the darknet for that. Next, please. So how do typical attacks look like? Well, the large majority of attacks are in fact relatively small in size. Not all attacks and only very, very few make it to the news headlines. So still, even if the large quantity of attacks is small in scale, like 90% are below 10 gig. But can your network cope with 10 gigabit of attack? Also, the most DDoS attacks don't take a long time. They last for less than 4 hours. But obviously, there are the longer ones, and these create the problems. So what protocols do you see in a DDoS attack? Well, mostly UDP, because UDP allows source address spoofing. And by the way, I haven't seen any reports of an attack over IPv6. So the UDP protocols used are those that allow an amplification factor. So how does it work? The botnet spoofs the source of view of the victim. They send a small request to the amplification server, and the server answers with lots of huge answers. And the answer to the IP address in the source, which is you. And that is really the problem here. And by the way, the problem is not really going away. UDPs continue to be used also in the future. You may have heard of a protocol called QUIC, which is the new HTTP. But this protocol has specific provisions to avoid using it as an amplification, because the server will only answer to the initial request if the incoming request at least matches the size of the answer. And that's to avoid using it as an amplification vector. Next, please. So where is the DDoS attack landscape moving to? What are the current trends? First one, you cannot talk DDoS without mentioning IoT. IoTs are a nightmare. These are mostly cheap devices where the vendor is not interested in security at all, and these devices are often in the hands of non-IT people. And that is a recipe for disaster. And don't think that because your security camera is behind your router at home that it is safe. It's sufficient to have one infected PC, for instance, in the network, and the attackers will harvest IoT devices from that internal host. So they will enroll even those IoT devices that seem to be isolated from the internet. Current DDoS attacks are mostly volume-based, but they use more and more different vectors at the same time, or they adapt to your defenses. If your active defense blocks an attack, the attacker will notice and he will change the vector of attack. He will move. And that makes it harder for you to defend against it. Remember the booter services. These are for money. So the booter has a natural interest in that his booter service is working well, because if it's not working well, you will not pay him. So he has a natural interest to push this forward and be active to circumvent any defenses that you will put in. Also, a new element that appeared recently in DDoS landscape is the cloud providers. More and more you see cloud providers used in DDoS attacks. And in fact, the attackers are buying regular cloud services, mostly with black money or fake credit cards and so on. But it's a regular cloud service. And from these servers, from these cloud services, they will launch attacks. Why? Well, because there are endless resources and lots of bandwidth. So perfect to build DDoS with. So what should you do? Well, if there's only one slide and one message that we remember from my presentation, please make it this one. Don't be part of the problem. Don't leave any unnecessary ports open. Do your cybersecurity homework and avoid getting enrolled in a botnet. Botnets exploit vulnerable services. There's scanning going on all the time. A vulnerable device connected to the internet takes only seconds or minutes maximum to get infected. It's that fast. So there is really no excuse for that. Also, I mentioned it for UDP protocols. IP spoofing, source address spoofing is an important factor of success. So please, please, please do filter your outgoing traffic. In today's networks, you have really no excuse of allowing spoofed IPs from leaving your network. Please do filter. Most ISPs have done their homework, but in the enterprise, there's still some work to do. Also, deny access to your internal hosts. There is no reason for them to be exposed on the internet. And look at an outgoing policy. Don't just let any traffic go out of your network. Most probably your web server has no business in sending large UDP traffic to a server in Brazil. So please filter that out as well. Next, please. So if you now are worried about DDoS, what can you do? Well, you should really document your defense strategy. Even if you start from a blank page, if you have nothing in place currently, start with the basics. What will you do if an attack happens? For instance, do you have the phone number of your ISP? Please have your phone number of your ISP in your mobile phone. Then, will you detect DDoS attacks? There's nothing worse than looking for hours why your router is overloaded, when in fact it's a DDoS attack. So do something to detect the attack. Maybe your firewall can already do that. If it is the case, enable this. Also, if the detection works, but it sends out an email, well, it's probably useless, because if you're under attack, you cannot send an email from internal networks. So have some kind of out-of-band channel where you can get your alerts. Once you have the detection in place, then you need to think about defense. And a first easy defense is to black hole. So black holing is an action that you can order at your ISP from remote, where the ISP will in fact block all traffic going to the IP under attack. With that, effectively you stop the traffic, but of course, you also block the service under attack. So you do a favor to the attacker. So it's not the panacea, it's not the right solution, but it's a first step in a strategy of defense. If you have large bandwidth available, then you can also consider having on-premise anti-DDoS equipment. If you don't have sufficient bandwidth, then probably it's not worth it, because any small attack will already overwhelm your bandwidth. It's only when you have a sufficient level of bandwidth that this makes sense. And then if you worry about the really large attacks, then you have to go off-premise. Then you need to look at first your ISP. Your ISP may have services available. Talk to him and see what these costs and if they're available to you, if you can use them. And if your ISP doesn't provide you the service either not at all or not to a sufficient level, there are many cloud providers that provide anti-DDoS services, and they are really best placed because they are as distributed as the attack. So they combat the DDoS attack on the home turf. But large attacks happen, and they can put services at risk, even essential services. And this is what happened to Luxembourg a few years back, where on a small scale, some critical services were attacked. Or it's also what happened to Estonia on a larger scale back in 2007. And such attacks, if they're really determined from a determined attacker, they can cause really problems to a country or a nation. And that's why the Luxembourg government decided to include DDoS in its national cybercrisis defense plan. LU-CIX has been tasked to build a national anti-DDoS infrastructure to help defend for such cases. So what is this national anti-DDoS infrastructure? Well, it is not a commercial offering. So we are not at all interfering with the open market. It's also not a replacement for your own cyber defense. you still need to do your homework. The National Scrubbing Center is a crisis instrument available to government to be activated in case of a national crisis due to a DDoS attack. The infrastructure is centered around the LU-CIX national backbone, which connects almost 100% of all internet actors in Luxembourg. This is a unique advantage possible due to the small size of Luxembourg. Can you buy this service? No, it's not commercial. Can you pretend to be protected by this service? Well, not really. It depends which services you provide. And only those entities that are designated by the government can pretend to be protected in case of an attack that would lead to a national crisis situation. So let's have a look at the technical concept. In normal times, the protected entity on the lower left here on the drawing is connected to its ISP to the internet and maybe to LU-CIX, and traffic is flowing happily either locally or to the internet to the world. And then along comes the attack. So the attack probably comes directly from the internet. Chances are low that any significant attack comes over LU-CIX just because the scale is too small. But if that would happen, we also have defense measures. So this attack comes from the internet over your ISP and puts all your services down. So you call the NSC, and what will the NSC do? Well, the scrubbing center will reroute the traffic and make the attack terminate not directly on your network, but at the NSC. Here, our defense equipment will stop the attack, filter out the bad traffic, and then forward the legitimate traffic onwards via the LU-CIX backbone to your network. So you can understand that a key factor of success for the scrubbing center is rerouting the traffic. The attack traffic needs to get off your network and needs to be at the scrubbing center. We do that using BGP, the Internet Routing Protocol. Easy as it may seem, there are a few pitfalls. Is the entity under attack still able to change its BGP routing policy? Or will BGP filters and RPKI allow the changed BGP announcement? This has to be prepared upfront and regularly tested. Also, in a worst-case scenario, the scrubbing center may have to generate the BGP rerouting all by itself. So the connectivity in detail. How is the protected entity then connected to the scrubbing center? Well, it is connected already to LU-CIX on the peering VLAN. And then next to this VLAN, there may be other VLANs for ECIX or other remote peerings. And there is now a new VLAN that is dedicated to the scrubbing center. And in normal times, you have your green traffic flowing from the internet, flowing over LU-CIX. But when the attack comes along, then the traffic will be rerouted to the scrubbing center. You see a bypass link. This bypass allows us to reroute large prefixes or large amounts of traffic of IP ranges over the scrubbing center, but only make those IPs under attack go through the scrubbing device. This helps us to avoid false positives or analyze traffic that we know is not dirty, is clean. So that's it for my presentation.